Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So today we're talking about Thomas Pogge's Migration and Poverty. And Pogge starts out with some obvious facts you may be well aware of. He notes that many privileged and influential persons in governments hold that they have no weighty moral responsibility toward foreigners in desperate need. He thinks that it's obvious that we do, and I hope that you take it that it's obvious that we do as well. But the debate then becomes, well, what's the best way to help people in need? And many respond, well, we should admit more migrants in the United States and other wealthy nations. And while Pog agrees that we should do that, he doesn't think that's the most effective way to deal with it, and nor do I. Rather, the most effective way to deal with it, argues Pog, and I would again tend to agree, is to eradicate the sources of poverty worldwide, especially those sources of poverty that contribute to such things, stark realities, grim realities as, quote, nearly 800 million people do not get enough food, and about 500 million people are chronically malnourished, with about 1.3 billion people, 24% of humanity, living below the international poverty line, which is defined as that income or expenditure level below which a minimum nutritionally adequate diet plus essential non-food requirements are not affordable, and currently corresponds to an annual per capita income of circa $75. Right? With hundreds of millions falling significantly below this line, we can assume that the income of the poorest fifth, 1.1 billion of humankind, is about 1/4% of world income, or $50 per capita annually, while the richest fifth has over 90% of world income, or 19,000 per capita annually, nearly 400,000, or excuse me, nearly 400 times more than the poorest fifth. Now, he goes on to talk about wealth. With regard to wealth, again, wealth is not the same thing as just money. Wealth is real estate, investments. When you cash all that out, that becomes wealth, and that's so. For example, someone like, say, Elon Musk might have a net worth of $200 billion, but that's not all cash. That's real estate, that's investments, that's plants and warehouses and things of that nature, right? So with regard to wealth, the disparity is even greater because the poor tend to have much less wealth than annual income, while the rich tend to have much more wealth than annual income. And again, that's definitely the case with someone like Bezos or Musk, right? So Pog goes on to note two important lessons, right, can be drawn from these amazing statistics. One piece of bad news, one piece of good news. What's the bad news? Bad news is the number of desperate foreigners whom the rich countries now admit every year, and also the larger number of desperate foreigners that they might conceivably come to admit under the best of circumstances. These numbers are ridiculously small in comparison to the number of those who are in desperate need and who would like to come. Okay, that's a bad situation. What's the good news? The good news is that despite the large number of the global poor, it would be quite possible to improve their conditions decisively if the rich countries were willing to make a concerted effort, right? All right, so what is the best way to go about doing this, right? Well, as Pog points out, right, just simply admitting more people is not going to it's not even going to come close to addressing the gravity of the situation, right? Okay, so what can we do then? Well, he wants to point out the benefits of something called the Tobin tax, right? So what's the Tobin tax? So James Tobin is a Nobel laureate. As I say, he won a Nobel Prize for economics, right? And this is his proposal. And again, Pog and myself agree with this. A 0.5% tax on currency transactions in order to discourage currency speculation. So again, currency speculation is when people bet that a given currency, say the dollar or the euro, is going to rise in value or decrease in value, right? So it's essentially, for all intents and purposes, gambling, right? It's not any kind of economic investment that's going to translate into a measurable improvement in the lives of human beings. It's just a way for rich people to gain even more capital, right? So again, a 0.5% tax on currency transactions in order to discourage currency speculation. The specific intent of this tax is to reduce speculation-induced speculation-induced exchange rate fluctuations, and thereby to enable national governments and central banks better to adapt their monetary policy to domestic economic conditions. But the tax would also raise revenue, which Tobin proposes to use for global poverty eradication. Presently, the volume of currency transactions is 1.5 trillion per day. Now, bear in mind, this article was written 2008. It's even more. That level of speculation on currencies is doubtless even more today. Probably 2 trillion, right? Even if the tax achieved its purpose by reducing its volume dramatically by a factor of 25, down to say $60 billion a day, this tax would still raise 300 million per day, or 110 billion annually, and that's enough to eradicate malnutrition, trivial diseases, and severe poverty in a matter of years, right? So if we just did that, we could eliminate global poverty, severe global poverty, in a matter of, say, 5 years, right? 10 years at the very most, right? Though that's just an example of one of the things that can be done, right? He goes on to note, too, the simplest way of raising the funds to eliminate poverty would be to oblige the governments of the rich countries to pay them out of general tax revenues, right? Of course, there's a reticence to do that. The long and short of it is, we have ways of dealing with this problem. They have not yet been implemented properly. So it is a far preferable policy on behalf of the rich nations if there is, in fact, incentive to get rid of poverty. There is that incentive on behalf of the people. Whether or not that incentive exists on behalf of most politicians and business leaders is obviously another matter. But it should be encouraging to know that it can happen. There just needs to be collective will to do so, because the means exist to get rid of it.